At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. After all, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Larissa. Let's begin.
Watch them, my children.
Lefip extended both arms as he stood among the 20 beings he had created in his lab, a new artificial species he named the Xeric, engineered to be the apex predators of the galaxy. He gestured through the massive observation window toward the arena floor below, where humans competed against another species in the galactic games. He could already predict the outcome. His Xeric would face these humans in tomorrow's finals, and they would win. It was inevitable.
Watch those inferior creatures,
he said, his voice cold and direct.
Tomorrow you will destroy them in the galaxy's most violent sport.
The game Lefip spoke of was a recent invention, born from equal parts desperation for entertainment and disregard for safety. At the center of the arena, buried deep beneath the surface, an anti-gravity motor salvaged from a decommissioned warship had been installed and deliberately miscalibrated. The result was a field of invisible chaos, pockets where gravity vanished entirely, leaving players floating helplessly, bordered by zones where it crushed down at 4 times standard, driving competitors to their knees. The gravitational flux shifted without warning, without pattern. Add to that a labyrinth of obstacles, barriers that could conceal ambushes, platforms that became death traps when gravity suddenly inverted. And the arena became a nightmare of variables no computer could predict. The rules were brutally simple. 2 teams, 1 flag on each side. Capture your opponent's flag and return it to your base. Everything else was permitted. Theft from another player's hands, bone-breaking tackles, whatever it took to win. The Death Worlders loved it. Species from high-gravity planets, predator world survivors, beings who had evolved in violence, they flocked to the galactic games for this event alone. For the normal species, those from gentler worlds with reasonable gravity and civilized evolutionary paths, it was a blood-soaked horror show they could hardly watch. And the humans, Lefip noted, were absolutely thriving. Lefip stepped back from the window, a flicker of satisfaction warming his chest. His 20 Xerics stood in perfect military formation, clawed hands clasped behind their backs, spines rigid, eyes trained on the arena below. They analyzed the humans with the cold indifference he had programmed into their very genetics, as they were supposed to. Then his gaze caught on an imperfection. One figure had broken formation. She leaned against the glass, both hands pressed to the transparent surface, her posture slack in a way that looked disturbingly like wonder. Her jaw had gone slack, her attention utterly consumed by whatever the humans were doing on the field below. Disapproval coiled in Lefip's gut like acid. He forced his movements to remain slow as he crossed the observation deck toward her. Of course, it would be Loala, their team leader, the one who was supposed to set the example for all the others. This made the transgression infinitely worse. He stopped directly behind her, close enough that she should have sensed his presence, close enough that his shadow fell across her peripheral vision. She didn't move. Lefip drew himself up, adjusting his own reptilian features to the posture of absolute military authority. Chest inflated, scales pulled tight against muscle, eyes sharp as surgical blades. He let the silence hang for one bit, damning moment. Then he cleared his throat, that one guttural rasp that all 20 of his creations had been conditioned from birth to fear. Lefip waited, letting the sound echo off the walls until every head turned toward him. He studied them as they snapped to attention, his creations, his masterwork, not reptilian despite what his own genome might have preferred. His years of research had forced him to accept a bitter truth. Scales were not the apex form. Temperature regulation through perspiration, through sweat glands embedded in skin, proved superior for sustained exertion and adaptation. He swallowed that grudgingly and designed accordingly. Purple skin, smooth and thick, long articulated ears that could swivel independently to track sound from any direction, far more useful than his own fixed auditory canals. Large blue eyes with exceptional depth perception and low-light capability. giving them vision that put most species to shame. 2 nostrils set flush in their faces, no protruding nose to break combat lines or create vulnerabilities, and yet somehow the configuration was aesthetically pleasant, almost elegant. They were perfect. He had made them perfect. All 20 now stood rigidly at attention, including Loala, though she had been the last to turn from the window.
Loala,
Lafip said, his voice hinting at the razor edge of controlled fury.
explain to me the meaning of that display.
He took 1 step closer, scales tightening further against his frame.
What exactly about watching those humans caused you to abandon your posture, your discipline?
His eyes locked onto hers, searching for weakness, for the flaw he would need to excise.
You are not afraid, are you?
Loala took a moment to respond, hesitating. Laflip noted with growing disgust before she spoke.
Those humans are impressive,
She said.
There is no point denying that if we want to win tomorrow.
She gestured toward the arena.
Their reaction time appears similar to ours. They seem equally capable of resisting impact, and they cool their body temperature through sweating, just as we do.
The observation deck fell silent. 19 pairs of blue eyes shifted toward Loala, then back to Lafip. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the atmospheric processors had failed. Lafip said nothing. Instead, he raised his wrist, where a sleek touchscreen band activated. His clawed finger moved across it very, very slowly, an action designed to let them all see what was coming. He scrolled through menus, past dozens of commands he had not needed to use in months, until he found the one reserved for absolute insubordination. Neural correction subject 01-Loala. He tapped it once. Loala's body went rigid, her eyes widened, pupils contracting to pinpoints as every muscle locked. Then the scream came, raw and primal, a sound torn from somewhere deep than conscious thought. Her hands flew to her head, clawing at her temples as if she could rip out the implant buried in her brainstem. The carefully engineered vocal cords that gave her body such clear communication skills now produced nothing but agony. Her legs buckled. She staggered sideways, crashing into the observation window, leaving smeared handprints on the glass as she slid downward. The pain receptors in her modified brain, designed to be more sensitive than baseline species for faster tactical learning, now became instruments of torture. Electrical fire raced along every neural pathway. Her back arched, foam flecked at the corners of her mouth, and still Lafip held his finger on the screen. Finally, mercifully, he released it. Loala collapsed to her knees, gasping, trembling, her purple skin slick with the sweat that made her body so perfectly adapted for endurance, for survival. Not for this. Lafip stepped over her without looking down.
Weakness of mind,
He began, his voice filling the chamber with cold authority.
is inadmissible. I have given you years of my life, years I could have spent on 100 other projects, years of research and sacrifice and brilliance poured into the biological masterwork that allows you to stand here today.
He turned.
I designed your muscles fiber by fiber. I calibrated your nervous systems to perfection. I gave you cognitive processing that surpasses 90% of known species. You are biologically flawless because I made you flawless.
He paced before them, each word sharpened to a point.
I have invested resources beyond calculation, funding that could have built ships, trained armies, purchased entire stations, all directed toward you. Every credit spent on your gestation tanks, your training facilities, your nutrition, your existence, it all came at a cost I alone bore. And for what? So you could stand before inferior creatures and feel impressed.
His lips curled back, revealing rows of serrated teeth.
Self-doubt has no place in your genome because I left no room for it. I engineered that weakness out of you before you drew your first breath. If it appears now, it is not a flaw in my design. It is a failure of your will, and that is unforgivable.
The silence that followed was absolute. Lafip's eyes swept across the formation until they settled on the largest of the males. Vranar. Broad-shouldered, dense with muscle that coiled like cable beneath purple skin, the product of Lafip's most aggressive physical optimizations.
Vranar,
Laflip said.
you will lead tomorrow.
Vranar's ears swiveled forward, his posture somehow becoming even more rigid.
Yes, Creator. Good.
Laflip turned toward the exit, stepping past Loala, where she still knelt on the floor, one hand braced against the ground, her breathing ragged. He paused at the doorway, looking back at all of them, his perfect creations, his legacy, his property.
Do not disappoint me.
The door sealed behind him. A day later, the arena stretched before Loala like a nightmare-made reel. Obstacles rose from the ground at irregular intervals, twisted metal barriers, transparent platforms, jagged walls forming a labyrinth with no clear path. Even the ground itself betrayed her, its uneven surface turning every step into a gamble between crushing weight and weightless vertigo. Somewhere beneath it all, the salvaged warship motor sang its chaotic song. Beyond the field, the stands erupted in waves of sound. Thousands of beings from countless species packed the stadium's seating that ringed the arena, their voices merging into a wall of noise that pressed against Loala's sensitive ears. She could pick out the cheers meant for her team. The Xerac, the first artificial species, had won last year's tournament. They were the favorites, engineered perfection, fulfilling the galaxy's expectation that they would dominate once again. The humans, by contrast, received only scattered applause, polite and restrained. Loala's ears swiveled toward Vranar, who stood at the front of their formation. There was still an awkwardness between them. Yesterday, he had been her subordinate. Today, he wore the authority that had been stripped from her, and neither of them quite knew how to navigate the space that created. His shoulders were set just a fraction too rigidly. Her own posture felt uncertain in ways it never had before. Across the field, barely visible through the maze of obstacles, the human team assembled. 10 males, 10 females, the required configuration for species with binary gender expression. They wore simple athletic gear that seemed almost primitive compared to the Xerac's form-fitting tactical suits. They looked ordinary, human. Loala felt no fear when she looked at them. What terrified her was the observation window high above the arena, where she knew Lafip stood watching. The memory of yesterday's pain still echoed in her neural pathways, phantom electricity that made her hands tremble if she thought about it too long. She was afraid of losing, afraid of the punishment that would follow, afraid of disappointing the creator who had given her life, who she still thought of, despite everything, despite the cruelty, as something like a father. She wanted to prove she was worthy of his trust again, wanted to show him that removing her as team leader had been unnecessary, that she could still be what he needed her to be. But there was another voice now, quieter, more insistent, a whisper that had started some time after the pain had stopped yesterday, a voice that said, "Run, just run, disappear into the station and never come back to the lab." She pushed it down. Minutes crawled past. The crowd's noise became background static. The drone's announcement shattered her thoughts. "Competitors ready!" The voice boomed across the arena, cheerful and overwhelming. Loala's ears pinned back reflexively. "Begin!" "Aggressive push!" Vranar's voice cut through the roar of the crowd. "We take their flag before they can establish defensive positions. Zora, Mech, Tillian, you three fall back only if a human breaks through our line. Everyone else, we move as one unit straight toward their flag. Speed and power. Don't get bogged down in individual fights unless necessary." Loala listened, her legs already tensing for the sprint. She would have been more cautious, would have split the team, sent half to defend, establish fallback positions, but this wasn't the time to argue strategy. Vranar was leader now, and second-guessing him in the opening seconds would only create chaos. She pushed off hard, her legs driving her forward as the entire team exploded into motion. The first obstacle came immediately, a low wall that required them to vault or slide beneath. Loala chose to vault, her hands catching the top edge and propelling her over in one smooth motion. Around her, her teammates made similar choices, their movements synchronized from countless training sessions. Then, the gravity hit. One moment, Loala was running at full speed. The next, her legs were pushing against air as she lifted involuntarily off the ground. A zero-gravity pocket. She twisted mid-air, grabbed a nearby obstacle's edge, and used it to pull herself forward and down, back into normal gravity on the other side. 2 seconds lost, but she'd recovered quickly. Behind her, one of their males wasn't as fortunate. He'd been caught in the transition between zero-G and high-G, and the sudden shift slammed him to the ground hard enough that Loala heard the impact even over the crowd. They kept moving. The terrain was constantly changing, not physically, but in terms of which path was viable. What looked like a clear sprint line could hide a 4 times gravity zone that would drop you to your knees. A seemingly impassable wall might sit in zero-G, making it easy to float over. Reading the field, building the mental map, learning where the traps were. This was the real first battle. Loala ducked under a barrier, rolled through a tight gap between 2 obstacles, and came up running. Her team was spreading out now, each finding their own path through the maze, but all heading in the same general direction. The mental map was forming in her mind, danger zones marked by memory of where teammates had stumbled, safe paths where the gravity felt stable, choke points where combat would be inevitable. And then, through a gap in the obstacles, she saw them, the humans. The 2 teams met in the middle of the field, and the collision was immediate and brutal. It happened organically, instinctively, males converging on males, females on females, the unspoken rule of the game, born from some deep-seated sense of fairness or perhaps just tradition. Loala found herself facing 2 human women, both shorter than her but built solid, their faces already flushed with exertion and determination. The first one came in low, trying for a tackle. Loala sidestepped, using the woman's momentum against her, and shoved her into a nearby obstacle. The second was smarter, feigning left before trying to grab Loala's arm. But Loala had been designed for this. Her reaction time, her spatial awareness, her muscle memory, all optimized for exactly this kind of close combat. She twisted free, delivered a sharp elbow that caught the woman in the shoulder, and exploded into a sprint. Behind her, she heard both women recover and give chase, their footsteps pounding against the arena floor. Loala ran. Her ears tracked the pursuit, judging distance, anticipating when they tried to close the gap. She vaulted over a low barrier, immediately adjusted as she felt gravity lighten beneath her feet, grabbed a handhold, and swung herself sideways into a different path. The 2 humans followed relentlessly. Through gaps in the obstacles, she caught glimpses of her teammates. Several had broken through the human line. Vranar was ahead and to her left, his massive frame bulldozing through obstacles with pure power. Others were engaged in combat, locked in struggles that would determine whether they could advance or would be pinned down. Loala pushed harder. Her lungs burned, sweat slicked her purple skin, the cooling system working exactly as designed. She scrambled up a nearly vertical obstacle, her claws finding purchase on the metal, then dropped down the other side into a pocket of slightly higher gravity. Her knees absorbed the impact, and she was running again before the humans cleared the same obstacle. The flag was closer now. She could see it, a bright marker standing in its base on the far side of the field. She could also see the 2 human defenders positioned near it. Loala didn't slow down. She hit the first defender at full speed, using her momentum to blast past him before he could properly set his stance. The second one managed to get a hand on her arm, but Loala spun, broke the grip, and dove the final few meters. Her hand closed around the flag. The crowd's roar became deafening, a wall of sound that made her ears ring, even as they pinned flat against her skull. She'd done it. She had their flag. Now, she just had to get back. Loala turned and ran back toward her side of the field, clutching the flag against her chest. The weight of it felt significant beyond its actual mass. This was victory or defeat condensed into a physical object. Vranar appeared from behind an obstacle, his face set in fierce determination. He was breathing hard but still looked strong. "Give me the flag." Loala hesitated for half a second, her legs still pumping as she ran. "Now, Loala! A human broke through. They have ours. Get back and defend. It's a race now. Whoever gets their flag home first wins." He held out his hand, demanding absolute. Loala thought about arguing, thought about keeping the flag herself, proving she could finish this, proving she could be the one to win. But that half-second of thought had already cost them time, and she could see the logic in his order. She was closer to the human side. Someone needed to go back and stop their flag carrier. She handed it over. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The pressures shifted. Vranor was now the target, the focal point of every human defender. He became the center of the game's gravity, pulling all attention toward himself. Loala reversed direction and ran back across the field. Two of her teammates, Karan and Zeth, both males, fell in with her. They moved together, a tight unit, reading each other's movements the way they'd been trained. The mental map of the field was complete now, and they navigated the obstacles easily, knowing where the gravity traps waited, which paths were clear. And then she saw them. 3 humans moving toward the Zarek side of the field. One of them clutched the purple and silver flag that marked the Zarek base. They met in the middle of the field, between 2 large obstacles that created a natural choke point. "Block them!" Loala's voice came out as a command, old habits reasserting themselves. "Karan, take the left one. Seth, right. I'm going for the flag." She could see the surprise in the human's eyes, the conscious breaking of the unspoken rule. A female going directly for a male flag carrier. It wasn't forbidden, just not done. Loala didn't care. She launched herself at the human holding the flag, a tall male with pinkish skin and quick eyes. He tried to dodge, but she anticipated the movement, adjusted mid-stride, and crashed into him with everything she had. They went down hard. The flag slipped from his grip, and Loala's hand shot out to grab it, but he was faster than she expected. He rolled, twisted, and his hand clamped down on the flag at the same moment hers did. They both held on. "Let go!" The human grunted, trying to yank the flag free. Loala wrapped both hands around it and locked her arms. She made herself dead weight, using her body mass to anchor the flag in place. Every time he tried to move, she shifted with him, staying attached like a parasite. "You're crazy!" the human shouted, trying to pry her fingers loose. "It's just a game!" She didn't respond, couldn't respond. Her entire world had narrowed to the single point. Hold the flag. Don't let go. If she let go, they'd lose. If they lost, Lafip would... The thought sent a spike of terror through her that made her grip tighten even more. The human managed to get to his feet under him and started to stand, dragging her up with him. Loala immediately adjusted her strategy. She waited until he'd almost reached full height, then threw her weight sideways, aiming for a shimmer in the air she'd noticed earlier. They crashed into a high gravity zone together. The weight hit at once. 4 times standard gravity pressed down on both of them, driving them to their knees. The human gasped, his grip on the flag loosening for just a moment. "What the hell?" he wheezed. "Did you just..." Loala didn't let him finish. She wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms around his torso, locking herself to him in a position that would make it nearly impossible for him to run, even if he managed to stand in the crushing gravity. "Are you insane?" The human's voice was strained, partly from the gravity, partly from what sounded like genuine bewilderment. "Why are you doing this? It's a game!" She still didn't answer, just held on tighter, her claws digging into her own wrists behind his back to maintain the lock. The human tried several different techniques to break free, twisting, dropping his weight, even attempting to roll them both. Nothing worked. Loala had committed completely to this strategy, and her engineered strength and flexibility made her grip nearly unbreakable. "This is ridiculous," the human muttered. He raised his voice. "Carter! Carter!" One of the other humans appeared at the edge of the gravity zone. The human trapped with Loala managed to toss the flag with a desperate underhand throw. It sailed through the air and into Carter's hands. Loala immediately tried to lunge after it, but the human, she still didn't know his name, wrapped his arms around her and held tight. "Oh no," he said. And despite the strain in his voice, there was something almost amused in his tone. "You're not going anywhere. You started this. I'm finishing it. She struggled, trying every technique she knew to break a hold. She twisted, levered, tried to use pressure points that should have worked on any bipedal species. Nothing. The human just adjusted his grip each time, staying with her, matching her movement for movement. "Just stop," he said. "It's over, look." Loala looked. Through the gaps in the obstacles, she could see the rest of the field. Ranner was down, subdued by multiple human defenders. The flag he'd been carrying, the human flag that had represented their victory, was being taken back to the human side by a woman who moved with no apparent hurry. On the other side of the field, Carter was calmly walking the Xeric flag home. No one left to stop him. And high above the arena, visible through the transparent upper walls, she saw the observation window. Saw Lafip's rigid silhouette standing in perfect, condemning stillness. Something inside Loala broke. It began as a tightness in her chest, then climbed into her throat. Her eyes started to burn in a way she had never felt before. Then, liquid spilled out, running down her cheeks in hot trails. Tears. Her body had never produced them before. She hadn't even known she was capable of it. They fell on the human's face where he held her. "This is the end," she heard herself say, her voice cracking on words that came from somewhere deep and desperate. "He'll never let me leave the lab again. I'll be locked away. Maybe he'll just terminate me. I failed him, and now..." "Wait." The human's voice changed, confusion replacing the earlier amusement. "Wait a minute." He shifted, bringing one hand up to touch his own cheek where her tears had fallen. He looked at his fingertips, then at her face, something strange dawning in his expression. "Why do your tears taste so familiar?" Before Loala could process the question, he was moving, dragging them both out of the high-gravity zone and toward a large obstacle. The crowd's roar had reached a crescendo. The humans had won, and in that moment of maximum noise and chaos, he pulled her behind the obstacle into a blind spot where the cameras couldn't see. "Mickle," the human said, his breathing still heavy from exertion. "My name's Mickle." The noise of the crowd was overwhelming, punctuated by the victory cries of the human team somewhere on the field. Mickle's team, his people celebrating while Loala's world collapsed, and he did something completely inexplicable. He leaned in and smelled her hair. Loala was too shocked, too broken to resist. She just stood there as the strange human ran his nose along her scalp, then moved to her shoulder, smelling the sweat that covered her purple skin. His eyes were narrowed in concentration, like he was solving some complex puzzle. "Open your mouth," he said. She did, automatically, too numb from defeat and terror to question the bizarre request. Mickle peered into her mouth, examining her teeth with the intensity of a scientist conducting research. His fingers touched her jaw, gentle, despite the weirdness of the situation. Tilting her head to catch the light better, Loala didn't struggle. The locker room waited for her. Lafip waited for her. The implant in her brain waited, ready to deliver punishment for her failure. Compared to that, letting this human conduct his strange examination seemed irrelevant. Mickle's hands went still. His grip on her waist loosened but didn't release. His eyes widened, and Loala saw something in them she couldn't quite identify. Shock, maybe, or disbelief. "No way," he breathed. A pause. "No fucking way, you're one of us." "One of you?" Loala's voice came out weak. "What do you mean?" Mickle didn't answer directly. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other. "Look, I know this is going to sound weird, and I understand if you don't want to, but would you mind coming back with me to our medical bay? We have a doctor, and I have a really bad intuition about you and your supposedly fully artificial friends. That lizard man, your creator, he loves to claim you're a perfect species he made from scratch, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "We need to run some tests. Please." Loala stared at him. Her mind felt fractured, unable to process what was happening. She was supposed to be thinking about the defeat, about punishment, about survival. Instead, She was behind an obstacle with a human who just smelled her and was now asking to run medical tests. She started. The tears came again, hotter this time, flowing freely down her purple cheeks.
I'd rather follow you to hell,
she said, the words spilling out without thought.
And go back to that locker room with my team after this failure.
Mikkel's expression shifted. Something that might have been compassion crossed his features, though he clearly didn't understand the depth of what she was saying. I don't understand your reaction, he admitted. But okay. He stood, releasing her waist, and extended his hand toward her. Follow me. Luala looked at his hand, scarred from countless games, strong, steady, offered without threat. She took it. Lafip had been pacing the locker room for 3 hours. 3 hours. The defeat still stung, not as much as it should have. Perhaps because defeats could be overcome, lessons could be learned, adjustments could be made. But Loala's absence, that was another matter entirely. She was missing, and worse, the 4 Zarek he'd sent to find her were also missing. His scaled fingers kept returning to his wristband, tapping at the display, checking the implant signals. All of them had gone dark. No telemetry, no location data, no neural activity readings. Just nothing. As if the implants had been deactivated, or... The thought made his chest tighten with something between anger and worry. He'd invested too much in them. Years of his life, resources beyond measure, his entire reputation built on the foundation of creating them. They were his master work, his legacy, his proof that he stood among the galaxy's greatest scientific minds. They weren't allowed to just disappear. The door to the locker room exploded inward. The blast was so sudden, so violent, that Lafip stumbled backwards, his tail whipping for balance. Humans poured through the opening. 6, 8, 10 of them, all armed with weapons that looked far too military for what should have been a sporting event.
What is the meaning of...
Lafip started, his voice rising with indignation.
You have no right. This is a private space. Humans aren't allowed in...
His words cut off as 2 of the humans grabbed him, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the wall. His arms wrenched behind his back. He felt the cold bite of restraints clicking around his wrists.
I am a recognized scientist,
Lafip hissed, trying to crane his neck to see his attackers.
I have diplomatic protections. You cannot...
We can. And we are, one of the humans said, her voice flat and professional. They hauled him upright and forced him into a chair. Someone produced a datapad and propped it up in front of him, angling it so he had no choice but to look at the screen. The display activated, revealing the face of a human male. He was no athlete, but someone who exuded authority. Late, middle-aged, gray threaded through his dark hair, and fine lines etched around his eyes, the kind earned through decades of navigating political complexities. He wore formal attire marked with insignias. Lafip immediately recognized the Human Diplomatic Corps. Ambassador Goodman, one of humanity's highest-ranking representatives in galactic affairs. Dr. Lafip, the ambassador said, his tone conversational but conveying an undercurrent of steel. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but given the circumstances, I thought it best we speak immediately.
This is an outrage,
Lafip said, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the fear beginning to coil in his gut.
I demand to speak to...
I was woken up 3 hours ago. Ambassador Goodman continued, speaking over Lafip's protest as if he hadn't heard it. Woken up by our medical staff with some very interesting news. Would you like to know what they told me? Lafip's jaw clenched. He said nothing. They told me that human DNA had been used as the basis for creating a new species. Not just similar DNA, not convergent evolution, but likely stolen human genetic material, taken and modified without permission, without disclosure, without any of the legal and ethical frameworks that govern such things. The ambassador's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were cold. And not just that, but this new species, your Xeric, are being kept essentially as slaves, property, subjects with neural implants that allow their creator to inflict pain at will.
That's not...
Lafip started. All of this happening in plain sight. Ambassador Goodman pressed on. You parading them at the Galactic Games, claiming to the scientific community that you have created a genetically perfect species from scratch, when in reality, Dr. Lafip, you copied approximately 90% of human DNA and added a few traits from other species, like a child in school trying to pass off copied homework as original work. The words hit Lafip like a dagger to the eye. No, this couldn't be happening. His mind raced, trying to find angles, explanations, ways to reframe the narrative. The Xeric were his creation. He designed them, cultivated them, raised them. Yes, he'd used human DNA as a template, but that was just efficient use of available resources. All species pulled from the same basic building blocks. The specific source material was irrelevant compared to the final product, the innovations he'd made, the perfection he'd achieved.
You don't understand,
Lafip said, his voice taking on a desperate edge he immediately regretted.
The complexity of the work I've done, the years of research, the refinements.
We've already run the genetic analysis, Ambassador Goodman said. 92% human DNA. The remaining 8% is a mix of traits from 4 other species, enhanced sensory organs from the Kresh, improved joint flexibility from the Torvins, minor metabolic adjustments from the Pilari, and aesthetic modifications that appear to be purely your personal preference. Lafip felt something crumbling inside him. Not fear of arrest, though that was certainly there. Something far worse. His reputation, his place in history. The scientific community would learn the truth. They would know he hadn't created new life from nothing, hadn't achieved the biological breakthrough he'd claimed. He'd taken an existing template, human of all species, and made cosmetic adjustments, like painting a ship and calling it new.
I synthesized the structures,
Lafip heard himself saying, knowing even as he spoke that it sounded pathetic.
I optimized the expression patterns, the integration of the non-human elements required.
Save it, one of the humans in the room said, his voice sharp. We've heard enough. On the datapad, Ambassador Goodman leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen, Dr. Lafip. You are being taken into human custody to face charges of genetic theft, sentient rights violations, and fraud. Xeric, all 20 of them, are being granted immediate asylum under human protection. They will be brought to Earth, where they will receive proper medical care, psychological support, and the opportunity to integrate into human society as free individuals.
They're my creations.
The words burst out before Lafip could stop them.
I gave them life. Without me, they wouldn't exist.
You're not wrong, Ambassador Goodman said quietly. But now that you have created them, I will ensure they get to experience a free life, rather than one spent as slaves engineered to serve your ego. The silence that followed was absolute. Lafip looked at the ambassador's eyes and saw nothing but contempt. Not anger, not outrage, just simple, cold contempt for what Lafip was, for what he'd done. You're a hopeless case, Ambassador Goodman said finally. Even now, even faced with everything you've done, you're only worried about yourself, your reputation, your legacy. You don't care at all about the sapient beings you created and tortured. The datapad went dark. The humans hauled Lafip to his feet and began moving him toward the door. As they dragged him from the locker room, Lafip's mind wasn't on the legal proceedings that awaited him, wasn't on the charges or the potential punishments. All he could think about was how history would remember him, not as a scientist who created perfect life, as the fool who copied humans and still managed to lose them. The scandal that erupted in the following weeks dwarfed anything the galaxy had seen in recent memory. Humanity's swift action, taking custody of the Xeric, publicly releasing the genetic analysis, sent shockwaves through scientific and political circles across known space. Debates raged about genetic rights, species creation, the ethics of artificial life. New treaties were proposed. Old ones were examined for loopholes. But for the 20 Xeric, the political theater was distant background noise to their own immediate reality. They were brought to Earth, to a specialized facility designed for their care. The neural implants were carefully removed by human neurosurgeons. The psychological trauma, however, couldn't be excised so cleanly. It took years of therapy before any of them could begin to integrate with human society. Years of learning that pain wasn't a normal response to failure, that questions weren't rebellion, that they were people, not property, not tools designed for someone else's glory. Loala was among the last to truly heal, but also among the first to find something akin to happiness. As for Lafip, he vanished after being taken into human custody that day. Some said he was imprisoned on a remote station. Others claimed he'd been sent to a rehabilitation facility. A few conspiracy theorists insisted he'd been executed, though no evidence supported that theory. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more perfect in its justice. He'd been forgotten, not erased for the record. His name appeared in all the official documentation, in the academic papers that dissected his work, in the legal precedents that cited his case. But he was remembered only as a cautionary tale. The scientist who plagiarized human DNA claimed it was original work, and then lost to actual humans in the very competition meant to prove his creation's superiority. History had assigned him his place. Not brilliant, not visionary, not even effectively evil, just pathetic. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, Loala thought that was the most fitting punishment of all.